So what is a Genizah? Genizah is the usual words we use, like sacred storeroom. As you know, in Judaism, there is a practice of Genizahing, of putting away texts that are holy, that once you've finished with something that has God's name in it, you shouldn't leave it lying around. To one, just because that's not respectful, but two, you don't want to leave things that are potentially holy to be misused. So like old Torah scrolls, Bibles, prayer books, all that kind of stuff. So in Judaism, and you can see this in the Mishnah already, they developed a practice whereby you have to put these things away where they can be securely stored and won't be misused, and they are treated respectfully. And the comparison is with a dead body. So when someone has died, you don't leave the body lying around. You bury it with due ceremony. And it's the same with texts, that you practice a kind of holy hygiene, and that you lock them away. Now, in England, and I think it possibly is still the practice, they will bury books with people. So when they bury someone,
you mean Jews will?
Yes, Jews will. Yes,
non-Jews don't do that in England, do they?
No.
Okay.
They will put books sometimes into the graves as well. Old books that they no longer have a need for, but which are hanging around in a synagogue to be disposed of according to the laws of Genizah. And so what the Genizah is, and the Cairo Genizah is in particular, is the contents of the storeroom, the Genizah storeroom of the what's now known, and has been since maybe, I don't know, 16th, probably later, 17th or 18th century, the Ben Ezra synagogue in Cairo. Their storeroom, which was, by all accounts, quite enormous, 2-story storeroom, although accounts differ, filled up with the detritus of the medieval Jewish community over a period of nearly 1,000 years, as they followed this practice of Genizahing their old texts.
You say Genizahing, so for the audience that doesn't know any Hebrew, what is this word ganaz, lignoz? Okay. What does that mean?
So the word Genizah is it's a noun taken from a root which is originally Persian. You find it in the book of Esther. So there's lots of Persian in Esther, because it's the story of
Genizah Melech.
Yeah, and and in that case it means the treasury of the king. Right.
Oh wow. Okay.
And so the word does mean to kind of to store away, to like treasure. And it comes to be used in post-biblical Hebrew specifically for hiding away texts in 2 meanings, because you can find it used in 2 meanings. One is to hide away texts that you can no longer use because they are too old, too damaged, or perhaps the rite that is practiced in them is no longer the current one that you practice, and therefore, but since they are holy texts, you Genizah them away, you put them in a Genizah. The other use of it is texts which are inherently holy because they've got the name of God in, but which are not to be used. And at certain times, this has included things like the Book of Ben Sirah, or other texts that are regarded as not suitable for contemporary consumption, and so you should hide those away. But you can't destroy them, you can't burn them, you can't rip them up, you can't cast them to the 4 winds as you can in some other religious. So Islam, for instance, when they finished with a text, it's acceptable, like even a Quran, to rip it up, to put it in running water. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, to dispose of it that way.
You're telling me Muslims, when there's a Quran manuscript, maybe not even a manuscript, is no longer in use, they rip it up?
It is technically possible. It is technically allowed to do that. Now, obviously, if a non-Muslim does that, that's a different matter, right?
Okay.
Because the intention is that you are stopping it from being misused. And, we can kind of see that in the Genizah already, because we have pages of the Quran, for instance, in the Genizah, which were perhaps used by Jews for magical purposes. Yeah.
What does that mean? Tell me what that means.
On the grounds that, your own religion is sacred, but other people's religions are sort of, they are your source of magic. So, the Toldot Yeshu, so the story of Jesus, right? So Jesus, performs miracles and so on. So
this is the Jewish version.
So it's the Jewish version of the story of Jesus. So this is the polemic against Jesus, written and circulated amongst medieval Jews. So they don't deny that Jesus performs miracles in it, but they say that he stole the ability to do it by stealing the magic, or stealing the holy powers of the temple from the rabbis. And that's how he does it. So basically, he's taken Jewish religious power and turned it into magic. And so the same idea is, if you were to leave, so in Judaism, if you were to leave pages of the Bible around, people might cut them up and use them as amulets, lucky amulets. And you can kind of see that because there was that guy who had a piece of the Aleppo Codex in America, wasn't he?
Right. He was a Syrian Jew who became a taxi driver in New York, and he had walked by the synagogue in Aleppo the day that the Aleppo Codex was supposedly destroyed and burned, and he saw two pieces on the ground, and he picked them up and he kept them in his wallet for decades. And when he died, his daughter turned them over to the
That's right.
to
And
Israel.
So that was a kind of lucky charm, you know.
But they would do that with the Quran. You're saying Jews would do that?
Well, we do have Quranic passages copied into Hebrew script
Really?
in the context of a book that also contains kind of charms for good luck in travel, you know, for protection in travel and so on. So the suggestion is that the Quran here is being used specifically for kind of magical good luck purposes.
Okay. So, all right. So we had three questions. One is, what's a Genizah? What's the Cairo Genizah? And how did it end up here at Cambridge?
Okay, so a Genizah is a storeroom where you put used or worn out texts that you can't leave lying around because one would be disrespectful to God's name that's in them, but also they might be profaned by other people misusing them.
To talk for a minute about misusing them. So you gave the example of, well, you said they rip it up in Islam in order to avoid the misuse. So using it as an amulet's one type of misuse. What's something else?
Well, even quite simple things such as accidentally writing an obscene text over the top of it, right? Okay. Or I think it's an established fact that some old Roman papyri are used subsequently as toilet paper.
Really?
Yeah.
That's so interesting. So I didn't know that.
Yeah. You want to be careful when handling old manuscripts.
That's interesting. Oh,
yeah.
That reminds me of the scholar or the archaeologist who discovered the toilet at Qumran. And he told me he walked around, he measured 2,000 cubits, and then he walked around the 2,000 cubit perimeter and just smelled until he found it. And after nearly 2,000 years, it still stank. So that's interesting. So, and then when they did tests on the feces there, they found that it was endemic to have diarrhea. So we used to think they were so clean because they went to a mikveh, they immersed in water every day. But if you're using the same water for 6 months and you immerse every morning, that's not going to be clean water. And so people were dying in their 30s because they constantly had diarrhea out in the desert, probably from the mikvahs. So you're saying you could be handling old manuscripts. I didn't know this, and you could be touching feet. Wow.
Yeah, because they have done some tests on some Roman stuff from certain areas that
okay,
has that.
Roman stuff.
Yeah.
So I've smelled some Torah scrolls that had two distinct smells. One was the smell of death, and that ties into what a Genizah is, and what you just said, that they bury it with a body, right? So if they're burying it in a cave, at some point maybe somebody went and pillaged that cave, but the death smell is still there. And the other is a very strong smell of perfume, which may also tie in, because that's a practice in some Eastern Jewish communities to throw a bottle of perfume into the grave so that the dead person, and I've asked people, why do you do that? They say, well, we don't want our beloved father to have to smell that, well, he's dead, right? But maybe on some metaphorical level they don't want it to stink, right?
Yeah.
So I wondered if those Torah scrolls, of course, it could have been there was a Genizah and a rat crawled in and died, and that's why it smells of death, right? I don't know, but I like my version better. It's a good story.
I mean, and you can see this as well. So in the Genizah one, right? So we have Qurans. Now we have Quranic pages that are proper intact, and from a Muslim, almost certainly from a Muslim provenance. They're written in Arabic script, finely written. Why they end up in Genizah, we can't be entirely sure. How they've ended up in a storeroom, associated with Jewish objects. Right. But the Genizah has become contaminated over time with other things, which we can get into.
Aren't there like love letters and things in the Genizah?
Yeah, there's everything.
Right, so it's not just things with God's name.
No.